First thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to press the new bearing into this knuckle. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my bearing in the freezer, maybe get a thousandth of an inch or so, have it contract from the cold, about maybe that'll make it go in easier. And while that's cooling down in the freezer, I'm going to clean up that bore so that bearing will press in there as easily as possible. And while that bearing, and the other thing I'll do is I'll clean out the snap ring groove, and then I'll put a little bit of lube on this, get everything ready to go so we can press her back in, and then we'll put on our snap ring, and then we will press our hub back out of the bearing and get this side of the knuckle reassembled so we can take apart the other side of the truck. Alright, sports fans, I don't know, once again, it's such a difficult thing when you're glaring your viewfinder so you can't really see, but I want to have it light enough so you can, so you folks can see. You see how I got that cleaned up there? Okay. And I just took some emery cloths. First I took a grinding stone on a drill and ground out the high spots where from chiseling up where I marred up that inner surface. And then I cleaned it up with emery cloths. And there's that kerf, that saw kerf where I nicked it when I was cutting out that inner race, if you can see that. But don't worry about those imperfections. They are not going to affect anything at all. That's not a bearing surface, okay? Bearing surface is inside the bearing. This doesn't have to be perfect. And there's virtually no way you can remove too much material using emery cloth, you know, so you don't have a good tight fit. The fit will be fine, okay? So now we'll go get our bearing. I put my bearing in the freezer, trying to see if it'll contract like a thousandth of an inch or so, maybe make pressing it in a little bit easier. And I'll put my hub in the freezer because that's what we're going to put in after we get the bearing in. Alright, sports fans, I got everything pretty much already set up and ready to go here. I used the other new bearing here to get everything lined up because the bearing I'm going to put in is in the freezer right now, cooling down. Now, here's what I was mentioning about. If you're going to buy a press, you might as well, right off the bat, buy one of these puck kits. Because here I got one of these pucks that I'm pressing against the bearing. Underneath I have one of these sleeves to support this knuckle, okay? Those are two things out of that kit right there. And like I say, it really increases the value of your press, probably 2-3 fold. You can't do much with a press without one of these things. So when you buy a press, buy this or something like it, okay? Alright, sports fans, I got my bearing out of the freezer and I got my puck sleeves and various pressing tools ready to go. So, got the bore sprayed with WD-40. We'll put our bearing in there, doesn't matter which way it goes. Put on our puck. Everything's lined up. So let's see how she does. Alright, I used an oversized puck just to get her down flush, and then to press it in the bore. I'm going to use a puck that fits right exactly on that bearing outer race. That looks like it'll be good. Alright, now we'll push her the rest of the way home. Starting to feel some of the resistance, so I'm assuming it's all the way home. Now we'll take a look at it. Alright, now do you see why? You're starting to understand why buying one of these press kits, pucks, whatever you want to call them, is well worth the $115 or whatever I spent on them. Okay, my bearing is in there. It looks like it's pressed beneath the snap ring groove, which is good. Now we'll look at the back side of it and see if it is if it's pressed all the way in. All right, looking at this, it looks like it's flush against that lip on the inside, so I think our press did a really good job. It was much easier pressing in the new bearing than pressing out the old one, and I think the reason is because I was just pressing straight down on the race instead of pressing inside the taper of that where the rollers rode, and that just tended to expand it and made it tighter. Everything looks good. I got my snap ring groove all cleaned out in advance, so next thing I'll do is put the snap ring in. You'll notice that this dust shield got a little bit bent up. It's no big deal. I can just straighten that out. If it got too bad, I could order a new one online. You could remove the bolts and hold it on if you didn't want to bang it up, but there's a good chance of them bolts breaking off, so I didn't bother. All right, I got put in the snap ring now, and you probably can't see on the camera, but one side of this has they call it a chamfer. It's kind of ground down a little bit, and this side's flat. The flat side goes toward the bearing, the chamfered side goes up, and I cleaned it up on the wire wheel just to get it so maybe it goes in a little bit easier. They suggest that you're supposed to buy new ones of these, and I really don't see any reason, unless you banged it up, beat it up, bent it, what have you, while you're taking it out or broke it. I don't see why you need to buy a new one. Also, I was looking for some snap rings that were heavy duty enough to work on this snap ring, and I couldn't find any heavier than the ones I have. Just for grins, I'll take the snap ring pliers I have and see if I can actually use that. Otherwise, we'll have to force it in the hillbilly way. All right, let's see if these snap ring pliers do the job. This is something you want to be wearing safety glasses on for sure. Just about everything you do in the shop, you want to wear safety glasses. Some things it's more urgent than others. Yeah, I think my snap ring pliers might have done the job. I think all I gotta do is tap this in here with the screwdriver and she ought to be good. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed. I thought maybe my snap ring pliers wouldn't have been tough enough to do the job, but they seem to have done great. Just gotta drive this in the groove. But everything seems to be fine. Take a look at this now. It really pays to take your time to clean things up properly, like a snap ring groove, rather than trying to fight with it and then trying to clean it once it's halfway assembled. Take your time, do the steps, in the most logical point to do them, and that'll save you a lot of time and a lot of frustration. But that bearing seems to be in there just fine. So, and everything should work good with that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the hub out of the freezer and press the hub into this bearing. In order to do that, we're going to have to, first of all, the most important thing is determine what is your back side. So you're going to press the hub going in through this side, because this is the back side, and obviously the hub has to be on the outside. So we're going to have to support this bearing we're going to have to put a sleeve or something in there to support this bearing. As we press it in, we have to support the outside. Actually, we have to support the inside race of this bearing. So we're going to have to put a sleeve that fits right here. And so all the stress is taken by the inner race of the bearing. All right, let's see how pressing in this hub goes. Okay, I got the hub pressed all the way in. Just looks just like it did before I took it apart, except the parts are new. And it does seem to spin freely enough. I'm sure there's so little, I had used so little force on that, that I'm sure that we incurred no damage. Brand new, so there's some amount of drag on it spinning, but I bet after I get the tire on it, you won't notice any difference at all, but I think it's just fine. Sometimes when you're pressing in bearings, if you have to really reef down on that, you can risk damaging the bearing, but I don't even think we came close to approaching that issue. Everything seems a-okay on this to me, so now we'll put it back on the truck. I'll just bend these dust covers back straight. All right, getting ready to put this back together. I cleaned up my studs that go for where the pinch bolts go through, you know, on this ball joint, and also on this thing that's very similar looking at tie rodding. I got that all cleaned up. I also cleaned up my axle shaft here, wire brushed it all off. I used to drill on a wire wheel on a drill to do this, where obviously you're going to want to wear safety glasses. And I tell you, you never stop coming up with new ideas, new tricks, because I was cleaning up this spine shaft here, okay, like that, okay? Now obviously I couldn't get in there because the drill is a circle, or the wire brush on the drill is a circle, so you can't get in there. But you know, it worked pretty slick, not even running the drill, but just taking the brush and going like this. It cleaned it right up to the end. So if you're ever in a situation where you need to use a wire brush for something like that, boy, that worked pretty slick. So I'm pretty happy I thought of that. Now we're going to start reassembling the vehicle here. And first thing we got to do is we have to kind of do things in reverse order. I'm probably not going to put it on the axle quite yet, because we had it on off the axle while we installed the pin, or took off this, I don't know exactly, is it like a track bar or what have you, anti-sway bar, I'm not sure what you'd call that, but I know I had the hub off of the axle, but as long as it's easy to get to, I'm going to put some anti-seize compound on that axle shaft. Get that all coated up. Both the threads for the axle nut and the splines. So if this axle ever has to be taken off again, it won't be so hard to do. All right, I got my just about everything ready to go here. I got my upper ball joint stud anti-seize compound on the axle shaft. I got my bolts here cleaned up on the wire wheel with anti-seize compound on it. You know, this here really wasn't too bad a job. Some people might think it's kind of intimidating, but there's really only 3 major bolts that hold this together. 4 if you include the stud on the other end of this toe compensation link. But there's really not all that much to it. If you can do a brake job, you can get the brakes apart. If you've been there before, the rest of it isn't too bad. The only trick is spreading those pinch links, and with a cold chisel. You do that, they come apart pretty easy, and it's really not too bad a job. I suppose as long as you have a press. I guess if you don't have a press and you don't really see a need to buy one, you can just hire out that work. Just take it to any service shop that has a press and have them press it for you. I would imagine they could do that for about $50. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the old toe compensator link, and what that is, that's the bar that goes from the center of the vehicle behind the rear axle to the bottom of your knuckle there. So that's what that's called. If you ever had to look it up to order on the internet, that's why I mentioned it. It's called a toe compensator link. Not something that would come to the top of your mind right away. So sometimes it'd be kind of hard searching for that on the internet if you need a new one, unless you know what the name of it is. So what I'll do is I'll use the old one as a reference point, and I will get these to be the same length by adjusting this joint right here, and then we'll start reassembling our vehicle. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to put this toe compensation link back into our knuckle. And of course we want to make sure we put it on the right part and facing the right direction, okay? You don't want to assemble things wrong here. That can make things difficult. But so what you need to do is determine, you know, what part is what on this, and we know that is on the very bottom. That's the bolt that goes through on the very bottom. So we know that's the bottom. Here is, so this is where our toe compensation link would go, because the upper ball joint goes on the top. Now, these bolts, they have a square head and they rest against that side. They just rest against this casting, and that keeps it from spinning the square head of the bolt. So we know the bolt goes through that way. And if the bolt goes through that way, this link here, you really have no choice, but it goes in right like this. So that just slides in like that, and you can tap that in. If it goes in with some amount of difficulty, you can also put your cold chisel in here and spread it again, just to make the assembly a little bit easier. So spread that out, then we'll be able to tap that in relatively easy. See how easy that went in? And then we can take out our cold chisel, and now we'll put our pinch bolt in. The cool thing about this is it's obvious. There's only one way it can go. Pinch bolt's got to go to this square head here, rest against the casting so it doesn't spin when you tighten it up. So we'll just tap that in there. And that's all there is to that. Then the next thing we do is we just thread on our nut. That's a lock nut, so as soon as you get her a little bit of the way on, it's going to be some tough turning. Mine are used, so it's actually pretty easy to turn, but now it's starting to get tough. So we'll turn that on with a wrench there. I'm just not in the mood to look up torque specs today, so I'm just going to guess on my torque. You can do what you want, but I just don't want to go look up torque specs, so I'm just going to wing it. All right, we got 18 millimeter nut here, and the torque setting that I'm going to is tight. I'm going to go with tight. Like I said, I'm just not in the mood to look up torque specs. This arm faces at about this angle when the vehicle's finally assembled. So, just in case that ball stud doesn't want to turn that readily once this is tight, rather than put all the stress on that boot, I'm putting it in its approximate position once the vehicle's assembled, and that should save me some stress on that boot. I believe that's how I ruined my old boot. So, and like I say, I'm just going to go with tight for a torque spec. If I had to guess, somewhere around 80 pounds I put on that. Okay, so the next thing we'll do is we'll install this on the vehicle. All right, now we're going to install this knuckle onto the axle and onto the lower ball joint. And like we already have this toe compensator link installed, so we want to make sure that we put the far end of it, make sure that gets in place before we get everything bolted up tight. Okay? Otherwise, we won't be able to get it in the hole it goes into. So, let's take our steering knuckle here, and we'll slide it onto the axle shaft, and then we'll try and get it positioned over the rear ball joint, get our kinda in place, and then we got our top control arm that we're going to have to push down and into place there. So I think to start off with, just so we hold everything in place, is I'm going to put this bolt that goes through the bottom, and I believe on this one here, the nuts were on the back. So I'm going to just get everything lined up, get her put together here. There we go. Now I should be able to tap that the rest of the way in now that I got it started. Okay, that's in place. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do this compensation link. I'm going to put that on the vehicle while I still got some play here. And I won't tighten it up, but I will get the nut on it and have it holding in place. And the next thing we'll do is go for this upper ball joint, and to do this upper ball joint we may have to jack up the suspension to get that to meet up. We'll see. I already got some anti-seize compound on my toe compensation link, so we'll press back on this like this, and that gives us enough room to get her in the hole. There we go. And now I'm going to put on my nut and washer. And I do not think I will tighten them at this time. I'll wait till everything is assembled and we'll tighten the things up when we're all done. Now we'll work on hooking up that upper ball joint. Boy, this is Wisconsin, but Scotty Kilmer in Houston, Texas doesn't have anything on us today. It's pretty warm. All right. I think I'm going to remove my brake caliper, add that to the upper control arm. Did that just to protect it. One other thing too that I learned on the other side is you want to make sure that your brake calipers don't get where they shouldn't be. Mine wound up on the front side of this suspension system when they need to be on the back, and it was kind of difficult to fish it through to get it in its proper place. For a while there I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to get it where it belonged without taking at least that upper ball joint off again, but I was able to fish her through there. But try to make sure that your brake caliper is where you want it to be once you do your final assembly. All right, let's see if I can pick this up and just put the bolt through. I don't know if I will or not. Bolt's going to go through this way because the flat end of the area that hits that square head is facing this way. So I'll try picking up on this. If this is hard to do, I'll jack it up with I'll jack up the suspension with the jack, and I think that's the way I'm going to do it. All right, let's see if jacking up the suspension will make it go into the upper ball joint. So far, so good. Make sure nothing's binding. Make sure my caliper isn't getting stuck in anything. Okay, that got her up there some. I might be able to push the control arm down now at this point. There we go. Look how easy that was, sports fans. It was so easy. I'll show it to you again. See, that pulls right out. You just push her down in. And now it's just a matter of taking your square head bolt, driving it in through the back. All right. At this point, we got her pretty much together with the exception of the brakes and putting our nuts on, our bolts and our ball joint studs and things, and getting them to the proper torque if you were to look up the torque. I'm just too sweaty to go look through books or go look up on the internet. So I'm just going to guess on my torque. So I guess you can learn as much from a video from someone telling you what not to do than what to do. And I guess what I'm going to tell you is don't not look up your torques. Don't guess on your torques like I'm going to do right now. Okay, so we will take our nut and put it on our pinch bolt. We already have that pinch bolt torqued down. This nut we're not going to use because we got a new one with our new toe compensation link. And this one here goes on the bottom. Okay, so now I'm going to torque up my upper ball joint. All right, I'll show you one other thing. Let's say you needed a deep well socket. The bolt is protruding through the nut quite a ways here, and you don't have one. You can gain just a little bit extra if you just take your ratchet handle and just stick it in the end without sticking it all the way through. Sometimes I'll give you just enough to get the job done if you don't have a socket or a deep well socket, or if you don't want to run and get one. So let's finish tightening that up. And the torque spec I'm using for this today is tight. Okay, probably put about 100 pounds on it. I think I'll put a little more torque on this other one too. Put about 100 pounds on. I'm just guessing the torque, but I think I'm probably pretty close. And I bet it is around 100 pounds. Somebody can look it up and prove me wrong. Okay, so that takes care of the two ones that are on ball joint type studs. Now we have to tighten up this lower arm, control arm bolt. So I'll have to go get a wrench that fits that size. All right, this lower control arm bolt has a 22 millimeter nut but the head of the bolt on the other side is 18 millimeter. I do not have a 22 millimeter socket, but I do have a 22 millimeter wrench, so I'm going to use my 18 millimeter socket on my air wrench on the back side on the bolt, and my 22 millimeter on the nut. Now we know this is the wrong way. You're supposed to use air wrenches generally on nuts, not the bolts. But this is what works for me right now, so this is what we're going to do. Alright, I got my air wrench all plugged in. So let's give her a zap here. Alright, torque's back really tight. About a 21 millimeter or something. Let's see if I can find something that fits a little tighter. I don't know if I can. Let's just do the best with what we got. Okay. That's that. Now, we got all our major bolts with the exception of that toe compensator link in the center. And I will quick tighten that up. All right. Okay, sports fans, from here on in, this job's pretty much like doing a brake job. All right, the next thing I got to do is I got to put on my parking brake cable, and that involves a lot of just finagling and fighting to get that to slip through. I don't know if you can see it or not, but this hole here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my parking brake cable back on, and boy, you had a choice between fighting with the levers on the spring, which I will have to do anyway because one of my levers fell off, or fighting it through this hole where those levers go through. They go through the backside right there. Either way, there's a lot of finagling and stuff, and I can't really get a camera in there to film it. It's just a kind of a big pain in the butt. Pick your poison whether you wanted to pull the levers out when you did this or you wanted to disconnect the cable. So that's that. To put my lever back on, I am going to have to push that spring back and slip my lever in that hole. If you do choose the route of just pulling these parking brake levers out through the boot that's on the backing plate, my advice to you when you're both removing them and then reinstalling them, get them cleaned up and coat them with brake grease, and that'll make it slide through that rubber boot much easier. Alright, sports fans, we got all the main bolts that hold this back on in place. We got the one that goes to the ball joint. We have the one that's the pinch bolt for this arm on the back. Okay. And that goes right up there. And there's a nut on the other side of that tab there behind the spare tire. That's what holds that on. Okay. And there's a pinch bolt on this top ball joint. Okay. And that's right in that area right there, if you can see it. That's all the main bolts with the exception of the axle bolt. And we'll put that on next. And the last thing we'll do is we'll put on the peripherals like the parking brake cable and the anti-lock brake sensor. Alright, I got my socket on here. I'll turn this nut on. And we'll use the air wrench to tighten her back down. Alright, that takes care of that. Now, the next thing we'll do is we'll put on our parking brake cable and our anti-lock brake sensor. Alright, sports fans, I got this thing back together. I just couldn't get a camera back here so you could see what was going on. But right here, this is on the back, that is the nut that holds on this anti-lock brake sensor. I had to put that on. Okay, there's a positioning tab on the bottom, the nut goes through the top. And on the bottom side of that, there's a positioning tab, and then this bolt goes through the top. Okay, and that's all there is to putting that anti-lock brake sensor on. The other thing we had to do is push in this parking brake cable. Okay, and there's the actuators there, there's the cable. But you don't have to disassemble this. A lot of people say you do. What you can do here is, and I recommend before you take it out, put some brake grease on these things that actuate the brake shoes. and then you can wiggle it out, and it goes through rubber, so the rubber really wants to hold it. So grease them up with that brake grease really good, and then just push them back through the back side when you're reassembling it, and that's all there is to it. It saves you unhooking your parking brake cable, but there's no way you're going to get the job done unless you get these things greased up with brake grease. They're not going to slide through that rubber dry.